Hey and welcome back to Fanfic Reading. Today we are reading The Warmth That Changed It All by Raalm and ToxicExotic. I hope you enjoy.
Chapter 46, Family Talks 2. Yang Xiaolong. Ah! Stop! As the streak of red darted away from her, Yang let out a small chuckle and took a step towards the cringing girl and opened her hands. The brown house spider, that was almost the size of her palm, quickly scurried to her fingertips, but she effortlessly caught it. Ruby had hated spiders for her whole life, and though Yang was always quick to get rid of them for her, it was hardly very sisterly of her to not tease her sister a little first. Why? He just wants a hug. Yang laughed and held her hands out further, Ruby jumping backwards. That's why he had so many arms. No, get it away! Ruby squealed, her hand reaching behind her to grab one of Zvi's discarded toys from the desk that she immediately threw at Yang. Dodging it with another laugh, Yang gave the redhead a small shrug, walked to a nearby window. Pulling it open, she rested her hand against the wall and allowed the spider to crawl away. Though she had just killed him for the first few years of doing it, eventually she had stopped. Though she was happy to eat a steak, or any meat for that matter, the idea of killing such a small creature, simply for the act of it being there, had started to make her feel sad. So whenever she could, she would always place them safely outside, despite knowing they would find their way back in. Cheers, Spider Buddy, Yang said cheerfully, as the small arachnid scurried along the bricks. Turning back to her sister, she showed her hands, and saw Ruby let out a relieved sigh and give her a firm pout. Thank you. MHM. Yang hummed in return and made her way to the top of the stairs. Now hurry up and take your shower. Every second wasted is another second someone could take something good. Slowing her pace as Ruby walked towards her, she met her sister's silver eyes and felt a smirk take over her face. Once the girl was close enough, Yang cupped her hands and made the motion to throw something at her. The scream that Ruby released echoed through the house, quickly followed by Yang's raucous laughter as she dodged yet another thrown toy and ran down the stairs. Jumping past the last 3 steps, she landed gracefully and came face to face with her father. Things had been tense for the past week, yet again, but the two were still on speaking terms, and he had not let himself go this time. He had still been rather secretive, however, but Yang had been trying what Blake had said. Though she made sure to remind him every day that the subject was not forgotten, she wasn't pushing him, instead allowing him to think things through. It was working so far. The tension had eased a little, and they were able to hold a conversation, and Tai seemed to genuinely be thinking about what she'd said. When she told him yesterday that she was meeting Raven again, he had told her that despite his caution, he thought it was good she was willing to give Raven a chance. She had also overheard him on the phone to his sponsor, but she never liked to pry into those conversations and quickly left. So giving the man before her a smile as he picked up the toy, Yang made her way to the kitchen. I'm making bacon, she said as she entered the living room, flicking the television on. As it loaded up and switched to the last channel, a music station that Yang liked, she moved into the kitchen and set about making breakfast. In minutes, the smell of cooking bacon filled the house, and as it mixed with the fast-paced rock music floating through from the living room, Yang breathed out a small, contented sigh. It was moments like those that easily made her forget all the family troubles. There was no tension, no arguing, no secrets, just the feeling of being surrounded by everything she loved. The only thing missing is Weiss, she thought to herself with a sigh, though not a sad one. Sure, their communication was at an all-time low, with last night being completely without a phone call and the usual morning hello being absent too, but she understood why. Weiss had told her about the seemingly impossible task that her father had set her, and she knew how important it was she succeeded. However, Yang was still sending her messages where she could just show her support and make sure Weiss wasn't running herself ragged again. Your sister is going to get you back one day, said a voice from behind her, and Yang looked over her shoulder to see her father sitting down at the table. You know that, right? Yang breathed and flipped the bacon over. She can't pick up anything with more than 4 legs. She would never go near a scorpion. That's a fair point. He chuckled and ran a hand through his scraggy, blonde hair. So you two are going shopping for the day? MHM. Yang hummed, reaching for the eggs and cracking one over the second frying pan. She should be back around 4-ish. If she doesn't go and bother Blake. And you're going to meet Raven at the food court? Yang could hear the caution in his voice as he asked. Yeah, she replied with a small nod. Do you need me to pick anything up while I'm in town? A new bulb for the bathroom, he said, though Yang definitely got the sense it was the thing furthest from his mind. So, a second meeting so soon. I take it things are going well? Turning to look at her father properly, she saw his blue eyes glancing down at the table where his thumbs were twiddling. Worrying that he had changed his mind about her getting to know Raven and no longer considered it a good thing, Yang raised an eyebrow. You said yesterday that you thought it was a go. I still do, he interrupted her and looked up from the table. I'm just asking. Oh. Returning to the almost finished food, she shoved some bread in the toaster and pulled a plate from the cupboard. It's going okay, Yang said, unsure how to describe it properly. She was however glad that Tai had brought the conversation up, and decided that since he had done it, she was okay to go a little deeper. She seems different to how you said she was though. How so? Well, you always said she was complicated, that she was always reserved. Yang shrugged and placed all the food on the plate. Turning everything off, she walked over to the table and sat down, placing the plate between them with 2 sets of cutlery. But she hasn't been like that. Not with me, at least. Or maybe she has and you just aren't recognizing it. Tai questioned, picking up a slice of bacon. The words weren't said with any judgment, but there was a certain belief in his voice that made her raise her eyebrows. I'm not saying she's hiding anything. I don't know her well enough to say that, not anymore, but the Raven I knew was never this straightforward. She's been gone for 18 years, and now wants to get to know you. She is likely putting her best foot forward right now. Or maybe she has changed. Yang countered, unable to keep the hope from her voice. She actually liked that Raven was being so forward with her. Maybe. Tai hummed and swallowed his mouth full. I'm not trying to make you doubt anything, just please be careful. I know how much this means to you, and I don't want you hurt. I know. Yang nodded, picking up a knife and cutting the egg so that the yolk spilled over the bacon. So are you. Are you willing to talk about her now? Tai's blue eyes locked onto hers. They looked tired from his long shifts at work, and though it had been years, she could still see that cloud in his eyes from his desire for alcohol. With how tired they looked, she half expected him to say no, but was surprised when he gave a slow nod of his head. It was subtle, but she saw it nonetheless. As adults, he said after a minute. So no shouting or arguing. You hear me out, I hear you out. Agreed? Without hesitation, Yang gave him a firm nod and sat up straight in her chair. Receiving a defeated sigh from the man, she picked up her own piece of bacon and waited patiently. I'll skip the finer details as Raven explained them anyway, he said slowly, his voice cautious. But the first time I kissed Summer, it was a mistake. Me and Raven had just had a fight over something stupid that even I don't remember, but she broke up with me, not for the first time, and Summer found me drunk in the park. What happened is hazy, but I know I initiated it, and she slapped me. Hard enough to sober me up. Once I was in my right mind again, I apologized, and we agreed to write it off as a stupid, drunk mistake. Also not my first. But I guess those things are easier to say than do. Stupid teen hormones, desperation, whatever it was, that kiss triggered something. Me and Summer had been friends since kindergarten, and I had never thought of it as something more, but after it had happened, it was all I could think about. Her too. But I also loved Raven at the time, despite all our breakups. So I made the stupid decision of trying for both. Summer hated it, always said she couldn't go behind Raven's back anymore, and that it was the last time, but it never was. That was my fault. Then years later when it started happening again, and we were found out, Summer had had enough. She was in tears when she told me to choose, not just because we were found out, but because she was actively hurting her friend. She couldn't do it anymore. We couldn't stay away from each other, and she couldn't be the other woman either. That was when I made my biggest mistake. All the others are minuscule compared to what I did that day. Choosing Raven was a mistake? Yang asked, confused as to how that was the biggest mistake he had made in this situation. Yes, he said simply, though regret passed over his eyes. I love Summer more. Almost every part of me screamed to pick her. But you were in the picture by that point, and I was scared what picking her would do. But Raven saw through it anyway, and things turned worse. She took you and ran, and I've only seen her a couple of times since, but I know her life has been a mess ever since. I was a coward, and she deserved far better than I ever gave her. But more than anything, I shouldn't have lied to her. You shouldn't have cheated either, Yang said firmly, trying to keep the judgment from her voice. None of it would have happened if you had just chosen back in high school. That's true, Tai said with a nod, but something else entered his voice. Something Yang instantly recognized as resolve. But, and you may hate me for this, and you probably should, I'm not sorry that I did cheat. That admission hit Yang like a truck. Taken aback, she simply stared at her father. Had he really just admitted to not being sorry to cheating on Raven? To not being sorry he caused her so much pain? What? You want me to treat you as an adult, he said with a sigh. And part of being an adult is accepting things about yourself. I regret so much of how I treated Raven. The cheating, the lying, the cowardice, but I cannot be sorry that they happened. Why? Because staying with Raven gave me you, he said with a shake of his head. And everything else that happened with Summer gave us Ruby. I know this might make me a monster in your eyes, but while I have failed at being a father in so many ways, I would rather go to my grave before I think about taking anything back that gave me you too. You and Ruby are my world, and I cannot be sorry for anything that brought you into it. That's... Yang cut herself off, unsure what to say. How did she reply to that? Those were her father's feelings. That was how much he cared for them, so much so that he was willing to accept the worst part of himself and take the consequences for his actions. However, no matter how much she appreciated the words, the idea of someone being fine with ruining a life just for her didn't sit well with her. Wrong. I know, he said with a nod, though there was no shame there. You will understand one day when you are a parent, Yang. I know you feel very strongly about Ruby, but when you actually have a child, you will know what it means to be willing to sacrifice everything for your child without a second thought. For you and Ruby, I will accept that I did something unforgivable, because that means you were brought into this world, whether you still talk to me or not. Yang looked down at the table, unable to maintain eye contact with her father anymore. Despite all of their issues, she had always thought of him as a good man at heart. He always tried to do his best by people, to treat them with respect, and though he had made many mistakes, those values had always been there. But what he had just said, what Raven had revealed, they had shaken her. Like Blake worried about the solidity of her parents' relationship, Yang now worried that her father wasn't the good man she thought he was. And had he not just admitted as such? He had. He'd said he can't be sorry for doing it, for ruining a life he knew was fragile. If he could do that, what else had he done? Those values he instilled in her, treating people right, and always working to better yourself, had they all been lies? I didn't want to admit that to you, he said sadly. That time, there was remorse in his voice. Because I am pretty sure I know what happens next. But you were right that you deserve the truth, and now you have it. So if that is what you need to do, then I won't fight it. Yang knew what he meant, as it wouldn't be the first time. However, her mind was still running through everything, thinking on her whole life. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do anymore. As she thought, she heard Tai stand from his chair and make his way to the door. From her peripheral, she saw him stop and turn to look back at her. But please remember that I love you, Yang, he said with a heavy sigh. No matter what happens. With those words, he left her to her thoughts, to her doubts and uncertainties. Why was that what it always came back to? Why could her life never be simple? A good father, a mother who hadn't left, one who hadn't died. Why couldn't she have those things? Was the world really keen on shattering everything she had? Was Weiss next? Or Ruby? Or Blake? How much more could be taken from her? And was anything safe? Questions. All she had were questions with no answers. It was all she had had for her whole life, and just as it always did, the anger welled inside her. A flick of the wrist was all it took for the half-full plate on the table to be sent flying towards the wall, where it shattered on impact, the sharp sound audible even over the music. Yang? The soft voice caught her attention, and she looked up to see her sister. Her hair was still damp from the shower and her eyes were wide, glancing back and forth between her and the mess that Yang had made. Glancing into those silver eyes, she thought on her father's words. He wasn't sorry he hurt Raven because he had Ruby, the girl from another relationship that, to him, validated everything he'd done. As she stood, Yang saw Ruby shrink a little. Yang knew the girl hated when she was angry. Something about it unsettled her, so she wasn't surprised to see the young redhead grew increasingly nervous as Yang walked to the door. But Yang wouldn't settle for it. Never would she allow Ruby to feel like she herself did. Never would Ruby doubt the person she loved, so the moment Yang was in arm's reach, she pulled her sister into a tight hug. Through all her anger at what her father's words had caused, she would never blame Ruby's existence for them. She could never blame her. Instead, she held there for a couple of minutes, Ruby's quietly accepting the hug. Finally, after a couple of minutes, Yang pulled away and looked down at her sister. With one of the most forced smiles of her life, she gave her sister a light poke to the forehead. "Time to go shopping, Rubes. I can't believe you made me buy a dress." Ruby groaned as they exited the store, a couple of bags in their hands. "Especially after I showed you that jacket." "A jacket I can't afford," Yang said with a raised eyebrow to the younger girl. "That's not my fault." "Not my fault you have a dance coming up either. But you're the one making me go." "Yup," she replied firmly, giving her sister a small shoulder bump. Receiving another groan from the redhead, Yang let the silence between them continue as they walked to the food court. Having fun with her sister was always a surefire way to cheer herself up, but as they made their way down the busy hallway, she knew it wasn't working like it normally did. Whenever she was alone for more than a minute, while Ruby tried on clothes, or while she herself tried on clothes, her mind would drift back to that morning's conversation. She still wasn't sure how she felt. On one hand, she was grateful Tai had finally told her the truth and, at the very least, admitted that what he had done was wrong. But on the other, he had shattered everything she had believed of him with one simple admission. She still remembered that it had been Tai who pushed her into boxing after an altercation at school. Some students had taken to throwing magnets at her during science class in hopes that they would stick to her braces, and though she kept her cool for a while, she eventually snapped and got into a fight that left them both with broken noses. Tai had been furious with her when they had called him in. She may not have always had the physique she did now, but she had always been rather sporty, and that made her naturally stronger. He had scolded her for at least an hour when they got home, about how she was lucky not to be expelled, how anger didn't justify violence towards those weaker than her. But mostly, he had been angry that she wasn't sorry about hurting them. "You are stronger than them, Yang," he'd said angrily, though Yang remembered she was also just as angry at the time. "And more importantly, you are better than them because you know right from wrong. But not when you are like this." After that argument, he had signed her up for boxing classes. Twice a week in hopes that it would focus her temper into something more productive, and even reduce it altogether. And it had worked. Just like her art and her cooking, boxing clicked with her instantly. It quickly felt like something she was born to do, and now she guessed that was because she literally had boxing in her genes. After her first meeting with Raven, she had looked up her grandfather and discovered he actually won a few tournaments in his day. There was nothing major, and he wasn't known worldwide, but he had blazed quite the trail through the lower professional scene, and people seemed to think he was a natural who was destined to go the distance. But then he dropped off the face of Remnant, for seemingly no reason. No one knew why, but from the dates of the papers it seemed to be roughly 40 years ago. The same time Raven and Crow were likely born. Raven had also mentioned an injury, but she hadn't been able to find anything about that in the articles. "Yang?" Ruby's broke the silence and drew her from her thoughts. Looking to her side, she saw Ruby watching her carefully, her silver eyes shining with worry. "Are you okay? You keep drifting off." "Sorry," she breathed out with a small smile. Fortunately, it didn't feel as forced as the one she had given that morning. "Just stuff on my mind, is all." "Dad?" she asked carefully. "Or Raven?" "Both." She wasn't going to lie to Ruby. I don't really know if either of them are who I thought they were." Ruby stayed silent for a moment. Yang knew the girl had overheard part of the conversation, but she wasn't sure how much. Turning the corner and seeing the food court, she wondered if the girl had overheard enough to know about the affair. While she wasn't going to lie to her, she knew how much Summer meant to Ruby. As much as Yang loved Summer, and still did, Ruby practically revered her. Yang guessed it came with never really knowing her, and therefore wanting to believe she was perfect. "Dad is right, isn't he?" Ruby asked sadly, drawing Yang's attention. "You're going to do it again?" "I don't know, Rubes," Yang replied honestly as she looked at the ground, as she really wasn't sure. Would you be mad at me if I did?" "No," Ruby's head shook after a second of thought. I don't want you to, but I would understand. Giving her sister a brief look to see a comforting smile on the girl's face, Yang breathed out a sigh of relief and slung an arm around her shoulders. I'm still not sure what I'm gonna do, Rubes, she admitted, and pulled the girl closer to herself. Except by you, that party-sized cookie you're always eyeing. Though she was clearly still worried, Yang saw a small smile pull at her sister's lips. Once they arrived at the door to the food court, Yang pulled them open and pushed her sister lightly inside. The multiple smells of food hit Yang like a truck, and she actually found it rather horrible. Not unbearably so, but the mix wasn't a good one. The smells of cooking fish and beef, fries and rice, and so many other things all joined together to create a smell that made her nose crinkle. She loved the smell of spices delicately blending together, of food that complemented each other. Thankfully, while horrible, it wasn't bad enough that she couldn't deal with it, and they quickly made theirs over to the small baked goods stand. As they walked, Yang scanned the crowd. The meeting with Raven was in less than 10 minutes, so she doubted the woman would be there just yet, but she looked anyway. Taking almost a minute to look at all the couples and businessmen and women while Ruby ordered her cookie, she was almost ready to say the woman wasn't there yet when her eyes fell on a head of pitch-black hair. The moment she saw it, Yang became aware of the dark red eyes that were looking her way, but they weren't looking at her, they were looking at Ruby. She thought Ruby would have already left by the time the woman arrived, but she should have known it was a foolish thought. It just wasn't her day after all. A small tap on her shoulder caught her attention, and she turned to see the woman at the register holding a cookie about the size of her chest and waiting to get paid. Oh, sorry, Yang said, pulling a lean card from her pocket and handing it over. Keep the change. After Ruby accepted the cookie, they both turned around and Yang saw Raven was still staring at them. Is that her? Ruby asked, her looking directly at the woman. She looks just like you. Yeah, she replied with a nod. You should probably head home or something. We're not really at the whole meeting the family part yet. Oh, that makes sense, Ruby said with a nod and turned away. As the small redhead gave her a coy smile, Yang pulled her into a one-armed hug for a couple of seconds before pulling away. I'll see you at home later. Have fun, Ruby said as she walked away. Once Ruby made her way through the doors, Yang turned back to Raven and saw that the woman was still looking at the entryway. Clearly introducing her to Ruby was going to be more complicated than she thought. However, when the door was shut and Ruby was out of sight, the red eyes flicked back in her direction, and Yang let out a sigh as she made her way over to her. As she approached the table that the woman was sat at with a large tray of food in front of her, she noticed the woman was wearing a top that exposed her a good portion of her chest. The tattoo she had only seen a hint of before was on full display, and the closer Yang got, the easier it was to make out. 2 black birds, and crow and a raven, sat on a branch. The larger of them had bright red eyes, and its wings were spread wide, while the smaller one had duller eyes and sat behind it. The meaning behind it was obvious, and from the heavily faded lines, it was clearly very old. Hi, Yang said awkwardly when she finally reached the table and slowly sat down. Hello, Raven replied, something in her voice sounding off. Though Yang was pretty certain she knew what had caused it. How are you? Yang didn't know what to say. She had promised to herself that she would be honest with Raven since the woman was always honest with her, but did she really tell the woman about her doubts? They weren't so close yet that she was willing to bare her soul to her. From that look, I'm guessing not very good, the woman said before Yang could talk. This can be postponed if you want? No, Yang answered with a firm shake of her head. I'm fine. And you? I'm fine, Raven said loftily. Though seeing what could pass as a clone of my former best friend is not what I expected to see today. Sorry, I wasn't expecting you to be here early. It's okay. There was a tension in the air. A tension that made Yang uneasy. From the way Raven was sitting up straight, it was clear she was a little on edge herself. Despite living with her father for her whole life, she still couldn't imagine what it felt for him and Raven to see Ruby. However, just like her words about Summer always being her mom, Yang knew there was another thing she had to make clear. Ruby is important to me, Yang said, keeping her voice even so that Raven knew she was serious. The most important thing to me. Scarlet eyes locked onto hers, and Yang could feel her searching for something. She had no idea what Raven was looking for, but she made sure to hold the gaze. What felt like a minute passed before the older woman looked away and gave a short nod while pushing the tray on food that was on the table to the middle. "Understood," she said stiffly and picked up some fries. "But she isn't to me. I want a relationship with you, not them. Having a relationship with me means you will know her," Yang said stubbornly. "That is not up for debate." Raven's eyes hardened at her words, and Yang felt fear run through her that the woman might walk away. But if she did, then so be it. Ruby was a non-negotiable thing in her life. If the choice was between a relationship with Ruby or a relationship with Raven, then there would be no choice at all. Clearly the woman saw that and let out a heavy sigh. "I do not want a relationship with her, Yang." Without hesitation, Yang stood and looked down at the woman. It pained her to do so, as she genuinely did want a relationship with her, but she needed to show how important a point this was for her. "Then we're done." "But—" Raven cut her off quickly and raised a hand. The word caused Yang to pause and raise an eyebrow at the woman. "I do want a relationship with you. If dealing with her presence is what I have to do, then I will. So long as you understand that it will likely never be anything more than me tolerating it for you." Staring back at her for a minute, Yang stayed firm. Finally, she gave a nod and sat back down. "I'm not expecting you to care about her in the way you did Summer," she admitted, picking up some fries herself. "I don't even expect you to care for her. But my dad once made the mistake of lying to you, and it's a mistake I won't repeat. I don't care what, or who, I have to lose, or how painful it is to do it, I will always choose Ruby." "I won't be making you choose, Yang," Raven said, her eyes looking onto hers. "But you are right, that I will likely never care for the girl." "I can deal with that," Yang said finally, placing the fries into her mouth. "Good," Raven hummed, pulling one of the burgers towards herself. "And thank you. I appreciate the honesty." "You have been honest with me," Yang said slowly, reaching out for a burger of her own. "I understand how you feel, though. It's not like I am expecting you to meet me at the house while she is there. But she will be there for important events. Then, as I intend to be there for them too, I will learn to deal with that." The two looked at each other again and let the understanding settle in. Yang believed the woman's words about likely never caring for Ruby, but it was clear she cared about the relationship between them enough to honor her word. So letting her body relax, Yang slumped back in her chair and bit into her food. "So," Raven said, her own voice sounding a little more relaxed too. "How is the progress on your bike coming along?" Laying on her bed, as she thought about her day, Yang rolled to her side to see that it was almost 2 in the morning. From the discussion she had with her father to the meeting with Raven, it had probably been the hardest she'd had in a while. She still wasn't sure how she felt about Ty's admission. She understood that he simply cared for them that much, but at the same time, she couldn't agree with his position. Being sorry it happened wouldn't change anything. Both she and Ruby would still be here. Him being sorry for his actions also didn't mean he would be sorry they were born. Was there something else? She was willing to believe what he told her about the affair was the truth, but no matter how much she tried, she just couldn't help think there was something more to why he thought that way. Of course, she could be wrong. Or she could be right, and Ty didn't know himself. Raven wasn't able to offer any insight either. During the meeting, they talked about plenty of things. Yang's bike, how it was living in Mistral, and what it was like to be back in Vale, along with what her work was like. With the history talked about, and out of the way for the most part, the conversation felt a lot easier. She was able to relax more, and so was Raven. She had even heard Raven laugh when Yang had talked about how she accidentally sprayed herself in the face with fluid while fixing her bike. The sound had been weird, almost like it was something the woman wasn't used to doing, though Yang suspected she wasn't. However, when the woman had asked about how other things were such as Weiss, or White as Raven knew her, and things at home, they had both stiffened. Yang still didn't like lying about Weiss, not when Raven so clearly valued honesty, but it was another thing she simply couldn't tell her yet. Raven had stiffened up when Yang told her what Ty said. It was an awkward talk, and Raven clearly didn't enjoy it, but Yang was already lying about one thing, and she hoped the woman might be able to provide some insight from what she knew of him. The result was the opposite though. Once she had finished telling her what Ty said, she had stiffened just as much as Yang did when lying about Weiss, and had even snapped a little too harshly at a roaming server for getting their order wrong. Yang had been quick to tell her to apologize, but the conversation from that point just felt off. With the relaxed mood broken, they had ultimately decided to call it once they were done eating, and after a quick goodbye and a promise there would be another meeting, Yang made her way home. It was on the way home that once again, that Yang found herself disturbed again. She wasn't taking the quickest route home. Instead, she found herself taking a route that added at least half an hour to the walk. At one point, she even realized she was walking the opposite direction. The worst was when she finally made it to her street, where she had spent almost an hour sat at the bus stop at the end of the road. Things like that had happened before, the longer route, the desire to not go home, and they almost always led to the same thing. But she was trying to not do that because she didn't know if it would help this time. However, as she finally made her way into the house and saw her father, she knew it would happen. She only met his eyes once, but quickly realized she couldn't look at him. He was her dad, but with what she thought of him broken, he looked like a stranger. She still loved him, he was still her father, but she knew then what her decision would be. Though it wasn't until that moment, at 2:30 in the morning, that the defeat finally took her, and she had to admit to herself what Ty and Ruby already knew that morning. I can't stay here. She couldn't stay. She couldn't look at Ty every day and try to work things out. She needed space, a place away from him to think. But where? Every time she left before, she had stayed at Blake's, but that was not an option this time as Ilya was there, and Yang refused to put Callie and Gyra out like that. The rest of her friends stayed at the college dorms. There was Raven, but that was far more than she was ready for, and Yang didn't know if Raven was either. Thankfully there was one person who Yang knew would help. Weiss. She hated to do it as the girl was always really busy and had a meeting tomorrow, and she really didn't want to wake her up, but she had made a promise to call if she ever needed something. So as she lifted herself off her bed and made her way to her closet to pack a rucksack for the morning, Yang picked up her scroll and called her girlfriend. Chapter 47, A New Home, Part 1. Yang Xiaolong. It was with caution that Yang stepped out of the car and looked up at the building in front of her. It was huge. She counted 50 floors, at least, but the rest were so high up that they were indiscernible from each other and started to look like nothing more than a large sheet of glass. Not that what she could see didn't look like a giant sheet of glass anyway. Yang knew what it was instantly. Founder Towers. Named after the two people who originally settled Vale centuries ago, Salem and Ozma, the Founders' Towers were a pair of apartment buildings stood side by side. Only the richest of the rich could afford to live there. Celebrities, millionaires, business tycoons, even diplomats, anyone that lived in Vale whose name carried significant weight sought to live on any of the floors. When she had asked Weiss for a place to stay, she had never expected this. Maybe helping her afford a small hotel that Yang could eventually pay back, not the most sought-after living locale in the entire city. There was no way she could comfortably stay there. People would stare. They would know she didn't belong instantly. So with a shake of her head, she turned back around, only to be stopped by Weiss. The woman had already stepped out of the car and slung her bag over her shoulder, and with a pointed stare, she shut the car door. It was clear Weiss was not going to let her go anywhere. Weiss, she hissed, thought the street was pretty dead, as it was barely 7 in the morning. I don't belong here. Yes, you do, Weiss stated firmly, her blue eyes holding her gaze despite the tried red rings beneath them. And I have nowhere else for you to stay. I told you, she countered. A small, cheap hotel will be fine and I'll pay you back. And I have told you, Yang, Weiss with a hard tone. You will never be paying me back for anything. And I will never have you feeling obligated to, which you will if I put you up in a hotel. Besides, I have already made these arrangements. Now, are you going to continue to stand there arguing with me in the street? Or are you going to allow me to show you where you'll be staying? Though it was phrased as a question, the fact that Weiss walked past her towards the door let her know that it wasn't. Weiss had made up her mind, and seeing how she had wanted her help finding a place to live for a bit, then she would have to accept that. So letting out a heavy sigh, she accepted her bag from Hazel with a small nod, and turned to walk towards the door that was being held open by a doorman. As she walked through, she felt herself look around the hall. The atrium was just as huge as one would expect from looking at the building's exterior. It was so large, in fact, that someone was mistaken for thinking they had walked to the ground floor of a local company. The entire floor was shining, white marble with the exception of a pattern in the center. It was hard to tell from her current position, but she knew it was a compass with an eye at the center, and a cane that ran through it from north to south. The logo for the two buildings. The two walls were also made of the same marble, and on the far side was a large counter. Sat behind it was a man that Jan could tell was in his mid-20s. He was clearly very tall, even though he was sitting, and the tan skin, large muscles, and short hair gave off a very intimidating presence. Whether Weiss felt that presence, Jan wouldn't know, as the small, snowy-haired girl walked up to the giant with confidence. Knowing she should catch up, she adjusted the duffel bag on her shoulder and made fast steps to catch up. He's going to see that I so do not belong here, she thought to herself as she quickly caught up to her girlfriend. However, contrary to her thoughts, the man gave a smile as they approached and stood from his chair. Is everything here huge? Yang thought to herself as she was correct in her assessment that he was, in fact, also huge. Not quite the size of Hazel, but still easily 7 feet. Although, she had to admit she was wrong about the intimidating part. With a smile on his face, he was actually rather handsome, and exuded an aura of protection rather than intimidation. As she drew closer, she saw his uniform had a security badge with the name Yatsuhashi Daichi printed on it below the symbol of a compass. Clearly they were in Compass Tower, and the one next door was Cane Tower. "Good morning," he said once they were both close enough, his voice gruff but friendly. "Can I help you with anything?" "Yes," Weiss said, and rifled through her bag. "Weiss Schnee, you were informed I would be coming?" "Ah, yes," he said with a polite bow, and typed something on the keyboard. "If I could just get 2 forms of ID from you?" "Of course," Weiss replied, and pulled out some paperwork from her bag and handed it over. "ID? You're not renting this, are you?" Jan whispered into her girlfriend's ear as the man typed more stuff on the keyboard and sorted some things out. "You do not rent these apartments, Jan. You buy them." Yang was very quick to raise her hand in objection, as there was no way she was letting Weiss buy a luxury apartment just for her to stay in and sort her head out. However, Weiss cut her off even quicker. "And before you say anything, no, I am not buying it either." Then WH. "All seems to be in order, Miss Schnee," the man said before Jan could finish her sentence. "The apartment owner has authorized 2 key cards." Pulling out a set of keys that were attached by wire to his waist, he unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out 2 cards that were roughly the size of a credit card. "Please take care that these are not lost, as there is a rather large fine, but if they are, then you can report it to us, and we will cancel the chips immediately. On behalf of Founders Towers, welcome to the most luxurious living spaces in Vale. Thank you." Accepting both the cards from the man, Weiss gave him a small nod and made her way towards a hallway to the left of the desk. Offering him the same, Yang slowly made her way after her. By the time she caught up, passing what appeared to be a retractable metal gate embedded in the wall, Weiss was already pressing the button on one of the elevators. Yang still wasn't sure about this arrangement, but became even more unsure when she saw Weiss press one of the key cards against a blank panel, and the word "top" appeared on the screen. Once the door was closed, Weiss' hand slipped onto hers, and the woman took a step closer, her head coming to a rest against Yang's upper arm. While she was still unsure about staying in such a fancy place, she instantly recognized it as tiredness. It wasn't surprising, since she had called her at 2:30 in the morning, and she had likely been awake for a while afterwards to organize this place. It annoyed her that she was keeping Weiss awake when she knew the woman had a meeting, so letting out a sigh, she slipped her arm around Weiss' shoulders. "Don't do that," Weiss said immediately, her voice firm despite her eyes still being closed. However, as she pulled her arm away, Weiss stopped it in its place. "I meant sighing. You are not keeping me awake." "Yes, I am," she countered sadly. "You stayed awake to sort this out for me, even though you have a meeting today, and so far I've just been ungrateful." "You've been stubborn," Weiss corrected her, a thin arm snaking its way around her waist. "As you tend to be. But I want to help you." "I know," Yang said with a nod, letting her head fall against the top of Weiss and inhaling the sweet, vanilla scent that drifted from it. "But I'm still not sure about this place. Who lives in this apartment, Weiss?" "No one." "Weiss?" "No one lives here, Yang," Weiss said with a shake of her head. "It's Winters." Taken aback by that answer, Yang lifted her head and looked down at the woman in her arms. Winter may have said she liked her, but she also said she was cautious. Would a cautious person really let someone they were suspicious of stay in their house while they were off? Wait. I thought you said Winter always stayed in hotels when she was here? Yang asked, the memory coming back to her clear as day. She does, Wise said with a nod, lifting her head up too as the elevator began to slow. She bought this place when she was younger, but barely used it. She bought an apartment that costs a couple million lean and doesn't use it? Before Yang received her answer, the elevator came to a stop and the door opened. She felt her jaw instantly drop at what was in front of her. She had expected it to be luxurious, but this was beyond anything she could have thought. The living room was massive. The floor was comprised of light, wood tile, and a white rug was spread over the middle. Atop the rug sat a large sofa that could easily seat 5 people, and 2 smaller chairs were sat on either side of it, all of them facing an enormous television that hung on the wall. As she hadn't yet left the elevator, Yang couldn't quite see what was down there, but one of the walls were open, and she believed she saw a few cupboards and guessed it was likely the kitchen. The far wall opposite her, however, was nothing but glass, and Yang could already tell it overlooked the whole city. The thing she considered the stupidest, however, was that there were stairs leading up to a second floor. Again, she couldn't see what the second floor held. What the fuck? She explained slowly as Weiss pulled her into the room, and she saw that she was indeed correct that the area she had seen before was a kitchen. Weiss, I can't st. Yes, you can, Weiss said with a raised eyebrow as she span around to face her. As I said, Winter doesn't use it, so it's unoccupied. Plus, the type of people that live in this building all know the value of privacy, so you will have plenty of peace. That means more space to think. Space is a bit of an understatement, Yang said, looking around to see a balcony bordering the second floor and what looked to be more chairs. She did go a little overboard when she bought it. Weiss chuckled, clearly amused by the bewildered look that Yang knew was on her face. From what I understand, she bought it before she left for the military. She only ever brought me here once, and she didn't seem too happy to be here. So she bought a multi-million lean apartment, but doesn't like it? I'm pretty sure the reason she bought it was due to the falling out with my father, Weiss replied thoughtfully. This place likely reminds her that she failed at something. I think it's stupid thinking, but she has always hated feeling like she failed. And you are Sue. 100%. Weiss interrupted her and held out one of the cards, thought Yang still didn't take it. Seemingly done with her hesitancy, Weiss rolled her eyes, and when they came back to settle on her, they were noticeably softer. If you need extra incentive, this place is closer to both Beacon and the STC. Which, with college starting tomorrow, is something I will be able to use to stay over a little more often. Yang felt her pulse quicken at that revelation. Though the idea of freeloading in, what was likely, the building's most expensive apartment still felt off to her, the promise of Weiss staying over more frequently was definitely appealing. Weighing the two against each other, Yang was easily able to see which she liked most, and let out a small, resigned sigh as she stepped forward to place her hands on Weiss' hips. You'll really be able to stay more? She asked quietly, wanting to make sure before she made her choice. Not every day, the heiress elaborated with a smile pulling at her lips. Probably not even more than once a week, twice if I'm lucky, and I will still be working, but yes. I could maybe stay every Sunday, and even visit during my breaks a few times a week. But that is only if you stay. You are making it very hard to say no right now. Yang hummed as she felt one of Weiss' hands snake itself into her hair. So say yes, Weiss whispered, a hint of hope in her voice as the thumb caressed her neck. It's your choice, but I can't help but want to be a little selfish. Not being there for you during your first meeting with Raven tore me up. I don't want that this time. I want to be here for you as much as I can. So please stay here. Looking down at her girlfriend, Yang couldn't help but smile at the sincerity in her beautiful blue eyes. She didn't think it was selfish at all, and the mere fact that Weiss thought it could be was the final deciding factor. So pressing her lips against Weiss, and feeling the gorgeous woman pull her in a little deeper, Yang raised a hand from the slim waist and accepted the card that was being pressed into her stomach. Pulling away from the kiss after almost a minute, she gave her a small nod. Okay, she smiled, knowing there was no way she could decline now. Not with all the benefits it offered. I suppose I can deal with this big, luxurious apartment if it means I get to see you more. Good. Weiss said happily with a smug smile before pressing their lips back together for a minute. MMM. Humming once the girl pulled away, Yang took a quick glance around the truly enormous apartment. So, have you got time to show me around? The groan that escaped the girl wasn't a good sign, and Yang let her head drop know that the odds of it happening were slim. I'm sorry, Weiss replied with a sadness to her voice. I really need to get to the office. But I promise I'll be coming straight back here after I finish. I know, Yang breathed, sneaking one last kiss as Weiss stepped backwards towards the elevator and began to rummage through her bag. After a couple seconds, she pulled out another card. Here. Looking at the card, Yang was confused more than ever as she had just taken the apartment key from her. To show as much, she squinted at her girlfriend and held up the silver card in her hand only to receive a head shake in return. No, this is a card to my private bank AC. No. Yang's voice was firm, as was the step she took away from the held-out card. That wasn't something she ever wanted, and the apartment was already too much anyway. But just as when Yang tried to decline the apartment, Weiss' face hardened to match the stubbornness that was settling in on Yang. This card is not leaving with me, Yang. Well, I'm not taking it either. The two of them locked eyes, frozen blue meeting hard lilac, and the softness that had invaded the room earlier disappearing as they squared off in a battle of wills. Yang knew Weiss meant what she said about not taking the card with her, but Yang also refused to use it. The money wasn't hers, it was Weiss, and to use it felt like a step too far for her, a step that said she cared about the money and would use it to get what she wanted. However, Weiss seemed to realize neither would budge too, and let her arm drop. Before entering the elevator, she placed the silver rectangle on a nearby counter. The code is 7246, she said firmly, and stepped into the small metal room. Buy whatever you need or want. Food, clothes, a new television, anything. Just please use it. I won't, Yang replied adamantly, causing Weiss to pinch her nose as she shook her head and let out a sigh. Why did I have to fall for the most stubborn woman in the world? Something about the exasperation in the statement made Yang smile, an action that Weiss copied in seconds. Locking eyes again, though this time they were both notably softer, Weiss threw her a grin that made her brilliantly blue eyes twinkle. I'll be back around 2:30, she said with certainty and bit her lip. I love you. I love you too, Yang replied as Weiss pressed the button and the doors began to silently close. With little more than a final wave, the doors sealed shut, and the only evidence that there was even an elevator there was an almost indiscernible crack and a panel next to it. Feeling a little sad that her girlfriend was now gone, and she was left in a humongous apartment alone, Yang let out a loud sigh and walked over to a nearby chair to slump down. As she set her duffel bag in the floor, she leaned her head back and stared up at the second floor to see a bunch of closed doors. Leaning her head back further to look down the hallway she had seen earlier, and saw a marvelous kitchen. What looked to be another hallways branched off at the end, but Yang couldn't see what was down that one. Well, she thought to herself, feeling a little hint of eagerness well up within her. 5 minutes of resting, and then I guess I should explore a little. I'm sorry, Rubes. The goodbye with Ruby was still fresh in her mind. Yang hated to say those words. She hated it every time she had said them in the exact same context. It's okay, Yang. Those words still rang in her head. She knew her sister hated that she was leaving again, that the face she had put on was forced, and it was almost enough for Yang to stay. But she knew she couldn't. The morning had proved that. Just like the night before, Yang still couldn't look at Tai without seeing a man that only looked like her father. However, despite that feeling, she had given him a hug goodbye. She still cared about him after all. Please look after her, Yang requested in a whisper. She knew he would anyway, but with her gone, Ruby would be relying on him even more. I will. The way those words were said rang in her head too. The resignation in her father's voice, the regret that he was the one who made it so Yang couldn't stay. It hurt her. She hated hurting him, hated leaving like Raven and Summer had, but she knew that if she stayed then all that would occur would be arguments. I'll text you where I'm staying when Weiss tells me, Yang said, walking back to the door and hearing the slight rumble of Weiss' car outside. You can visit whenever. As always. Before Yang had even finished her sentence, Ruby's arms had been wrapped around her, and Yang felt her own embrace the girl on instinct. Again she wanted to stay, wanted to do anything that stopped Ruby hurting, but it was the one thing she couldn't do, as the fighting would only hurt her anyway. So all she could do stroke the girl hair lightly and wait for it to pass. "I'll miss you," she whimpered, the noise making Yang's stomach churn. "I'll miss you too, Ruby," she had replied, tightening her embrace on her sister. "But hey, nothing's gonna change. You ever need me, or want to stay over, just call." She'd received a nod to that, and after another couple of seconds, the girl had moved away with a sniffle. The weak smile that Yang gave her did nothing to really cheer the redhead up, and only served to upset Yang a little further at the fact she was leaving her. But she had to suppress that. She had to put her feelings aside and go, otherwise she would never leave, and she would also make Weiss late for work. So it was with a heavy heart that she turned away from her sister and pulled the door open, daring not to turn back for fear of her resolve breaking, so simply settling for a wave as she left and shut it behind her. It had only taken the short, 20-second walk to the car for tears to roll down her face, but Weiss had been quick to comfort her the moment she entered the vehicle. During the drive, she had told Weiss about everything that happened. Everything with Ty and Raven, her worries about leaving. It felt good to talk to her after days of sparse conversations, to rest in her girlfriend's arms and spill her tears without judgment. But those tears had stopped spilling, and now Yang was left with nothing but the silence of her new apartment while she waited for Weiss to return. Her thoughts on the place being big were a massive understatement. From her exploration, she found that the apartment had 3 living rooms. 3. What kind of apartment needed 3 living rooms? Each one had its own apparent reason for existing. The upstairs one was the smallest, still far bigger than the one at home, but clearly designed for more comfort. The one at the entryway was the biggest by far and looked out over the business district, well, pretty much the whole of Vale, honestly. It was clearly designed to make a good first impression to whoever stepped out of the elevator. The third, however, was immediately Yang's favorite. While larger than the upstairs one, it was nowhere near the gargantuan space of the entry room. The dark brown wooden tiles and gray couches that sat atop a cream rug made the space feel warm, but the thing she loved the most was the window. When she first looked out of it, she knew that it would be the room she spent most of her time in, and had instantly pulled one of the single chairs and a small table to it. While the other room overlooked the business district, this one overlooked the ocean, including the island of Patch, the beautifully lush island standing out vibrantly against the water. She still hated the ocean, and the sense of unease that came over her as it gazed at her, but there was something else that made the unease bearable. On the left of the island was a small forest, and jutting out from the dense grove of trees was a cliff. The cliff. She couldn't see the grave. She doubted she would even be able to with binoculars, but at least she could still see her mother's resting place. She didn't know how long she had been sat there in the exceedingly comfortable chair. She knew it must have taken at least an hour to explore the apartment, as there were so many rooms dedicated to different things. As well as the 3 living rooms and the beautiful kitchen that Yang had fallen in love with the second she entered it, there was also a dining room, small personal gym, 2 offices, for bedrooms, and a small space that led out to the covered balcony that was so large it had its own pool and hot tub. And that was just downstairs. Upstairs held more rooms, another office, and a washroom that was almost the size of the room she was currently sitting in. There was only one word for that she could use to describe her new place. Luxury. She knew Weiss' family was rich, it was hard not to know, but this was on a whole other level. The apartment was the penthouse of a world-renowned luxury building. A quick internet search had shown that the lower apartments went for over 10 million lien, but she had no idea what the penthouse was worth, though her best guess was at least triple. As she had roamed its many rooms, it had dawned on her just how rich her girlfriend was. Yang wanted a future with Weiss. She knew that much already, and it dawned on her that apartments like this likely were that future. Even if their plans failed, if Weiss couldn't keep the company, the woman had so much money that Yang knew she could buy a place like this and still not dent her private account. Winter had done exactly that after all, and from what Yang knew of their grandfather, he hardly seemed the type to put more away for one grandchild than another. But despite all that, despite that realization, she still hadn't even looked at the card Weiss had left. She didn't care about the money. Where many would have taken the card and had fun to their heart's content, and she knew many of Weiss' past partners had, Yang simply didn't care to. The apartment, the financial security, they were benefits for sure, but Weiss was the important thing. How she felt wrapped in her arms, how good it felt to be around her, and how incredibly lucky she considered herself for finding someone that wonderful who could also be strong and stubborn when needed. Those things were far more important than any amount of money that card held. So when she felt a small buzz from the scroll that had been resting in her hand for however long she had spent looking at her former island home, and saw a message from Wise saying she had just left the office, Yang felt a wide smile stretched itself across her face for the first time since the girl had left for work. At the thought of Wise getting in her car to come and see her in a private apartment, happiness flooded her previously downcast mind as a single thought shone through. I can certainly get used to that feeling. Wise Schnee. The slight motion of the car coming to a stop pulled Weiss' focus from the folders she was studying. Though there wasn't much paperwork in them, they had managed to hold her attention all day. Seal had finally uncovered them, Weiss having reached out to her when she realized she couldn't search, catch up at work, prepare for the meeting with Ironwood, and practice her piano playing all at the same time. She had been hesitant to reach out and ask to add more work to the woman's plate, as she undoubtedly had a lot of her own stuff, but Seal seemed happy enough to help her. And thankfully she did, because it had only taken her 2 days to manage to dig up the files for the Amatolas. While most of the paperwork in that folder was about their deaths and the company investigation, which ruled it as an on-site accident caused by worker negligence, it did mention the name of the mine that they worked in. With the name, Weiss easily had tracked down the files for it, and was rather confused by what she saw. The mines were in perfect condition. An inspector had even checked on them barely a month prior. However, while the letter of approval was signed and stamped by a woman named Carmine Esclados, something about it felt wrong. A mine that passed with almost full marks should not have fallen within a month without being sabotaged. Admittedly, Weiss knew sabotage was too far, even for her father. He may be cruel and heartless, but he cared about money. Collapsing a mine would cost the company more than the insurance would pay out. Bribing the inspector to give a false report, however, that was definitely something he would do. Bribery was a pastime of his. Winter, reporters, council workers, employees, Weiss knew he was very capable of bribing a mine inspector in an attempt to avoid the cost of fixing it. But she had no proof. After the collapse, another inspector by the name of Bertolac Celadon had mulled over the remains and deemed it to be worker error that caused it. Again, Weiss felt it wasn't quite honest, but knew she would have to dig deeper to uncover anything. That digging would have to be done alone though, as she refused to drag Seal into what could potentially be a rather large mess. However, with the folders being able to tell her no more, Weiss let out a sigh and put them to the side, stretching her back while waiting for the car to move again. She felt excitement pulse through her as she remembered what awaited her. An entire night with Yang. No work, no practice, no obligations, just her beautiful girlfriend. Of course, the mood probably wouldn't be what she had expected yesterday, with her having left home and now staying in a strange apartment, but Weiss was happy she could at least be there for her this time. From the sound of it, Ty had finally come clean about what had happened, but the answer had disturbed Yang, though Weiss could easily see why hearing someone you love say they were okay with destroying a life might shake someone. But while she agreed with Yang's decision, she also couldn't help but sympathize with Ty. He had already lost so much due to his mistakes, it was only natural for him to be clinging to the good that came from them. More than anything though, she felt bad for Yang as the whole situation certainly was a mess she didn't deserve in the slightest. Thankfully, as she thought of Yang crying in the very same seat she was currently sat in, Weiss felt the car begin to move again. It wouldn't be long until she arrived at the towers. 15 minutes later, Weiss was pushing the door to Compass Tower open and walking for the elevator. Receiving a polite nod from the security guard, which Weiss returned with an equally polite smile, she pressed the button to call the elevator and made her way up to the apartment. An admittedly large apartment, even by her standards. With how long it had been since her visit, she'd forgotten just how big it was, though thankfully Yang's profane exclamation spoke for her. With the size and the grandeur compared to what Yang expected, Weiss had been half worried the woman would refuse, but thankfully she had been able to convince her. The access to her bank account had been one area she knew Yang wouldn't budge on, but she offered anyway. And sure enough, when she stepped out of the elevator, the card was in the exact same place as she left it. Despite knowing it would be, Weiss felt a sigh push past her lips anyway. Not seeing Yang anywhere in the main room, Weiss decided to look around a little. Given how huge the place was, she decided to first try a place she knew Yang would love. Unfortunately, the kitchen was empty, the marble clean and untouched. The sight made her worry Yang had left for a second, But then she remembered Yang had replied to her earlier text and felt relief rush through her. So knowing she was around somewhere, she pressed on and arrived at a second living room. The head of blonde hair instantly caught her attention, and she saw her girlfriend sitting in a chair near the window, the sunlight that streamed through it making Yang's hair look like it was glowing. Very silently, she crept towards her, the woman, placing her bag on the couch as she went, and wrapped her arms around the boxer's muscular shoulders from behind. She tensed for only a second before settling. "Hey!" "Sorry," she said, hummed, her eyes still looking out the window towards the island of Patch in the distance. "Must have been in a world of my own. I didn't hear the elevator coming up. I'm pretty sure it's designed that way," Weiss chuckled, placing her chin softly on top of Yang's shining hair. "Are you doing okay?" "Kinda." Yang sighed longingly, her hand coming up to stroke one of Weiss' arms. "Just remembering how simple things were when I lived there." Weiss glanced up at the island that sat just off the shore of Vale. She knew that Yang had moved away from it just after Summer's death, so she could see exactly why she was longing for it now. It was the place that held all her good memories from a time when nothing was complex. "You'll work things out, Yang," Weiss replied gently. "I know you will." "How can you be sure?" the woman asked, her voice filled with so much self-doubt that it almost hurt Weiss to hear it. "We've fought and argued, but it's never felt like this before. It's never felt like I don't even know him. Because I know what family means to you," Weiss replied firmly, removing her hands and walking around the chair to sit on the woman's lap. "You care so much that you're even giving Raven another chance." "I don't know." Yang sighed again, Weiss feeling the blonde's arms wrap themselves around her waist and pull her close. "If he slipped up and had a drink, I could deal with it. If he fell into another spiral, I could deal with that too. Those are things I know he can't help. But this is something he is okay with. I don't know how to deal with this one." "You'll figure it out, Yang," Weiss said reassuringly, reaching up to push a stray lock of blonde hair behind the woman's ear. "Because you still want a relationship with him. I know that once you figure things out, you won't have an issue mending these broken bridges." Yang's jaws moved, but no words came out. Instead, the blonde's head fell back against the chair and Weiss snuggled in a little closer, her own head resting comfortably in the space between the brawler's neck and shoulder. Knowing Yang needed to silence to think, Weiss happily gave it to her, selfishly allowing herself to relax into the lavender scent of the woman she loved while she did. The gentle grazing of Yang's fingers on her side turned into firm pressure on her back that threatened to pull a groan from her, but a small peek-up showed that the wonderful massage was likely being done absent-mindedly. Unaware or not though, it felt amazing, and the tension from her day at work began to slowly melt away. The minutes passed in silence, Yang deep in thought, and Weiss enjoying the idle ministrations. However, Yang finally let out a sigh, and Weiss felt the woman's head rest against the top of her own. "So how was work?" she breathed, the tone of her voice making it clear she wanted to change the subject. "Busy, as usual," she replied in an involuntary groan, as Yang obviously realized what she was doing and increased the pressure of the massage. "I could have left early if the department head hadn't given me a last-minute task for a meeting tomorrow. Can't you tell him to shove it? I may be the heiress, but I'm still just an employee there at the moment." Weiss chuckled, the response completely unsurprising her. "Besides, thanks to the work keeping me there, I was still in the office when Seal gave me something that might help us." "Really?" "I think my father may have bribed the people that inspected the mine that Ilya's parents worked in so that he didn't have to spend money fixing it." "Are you sure?" Weiss gave a small shake of her head and stifled a yawn. "No. I don't have any proof yet, just some things don't feel right," she replied. "But if he did for that one, then he probably did for others too. Probably even Roman's estate." "What are you gonna do if he did?" Yang asked after a second of thought. "Tell the police?" "I'm not sure," Weiss said honestly. "He has enough power that the charges likely wouldn't stick. I'll find some way to use it though." Feeling Yang give a small nod of her head, Weiss reached her hand out to take the blonde's free one. It was nice just how comfortable it felt to just sit on the woman's lap. She would have thought it would be awkward, almost babyish and cramped, but it felt nothing like that at all. Her small body seemed to fit into Yang's larger one perfectly, her strong arms easily able to reach around and embrace her. The awkwardness she expected when she'd first done it was completely absent as well. Instead, the smell of lavender and heat that always emanated from the woman instantly put Weiss' mind at ease. It felt loving. Like a position Weiss could easily spend days in just relaxing and letting the stress drain away. She hoped Jan liked it just as much as she did, but was fairly confident that the way the bodacious brawler would instantly embrace her and pull her closer meant she did. However, all of that combined with the long day at work and the lack of sleep from arranging the apartment with Winter, Weiss could feel her eyes start to drift shut. Looking out the window at the beautiful ocean, she saw it turn dark for a split second as her eyes closed. With a jolt she made to sit up, but Yang's arm held her firmly in place. "Get some rest if you want," the woman said softly, her massage turning to gentle stroking. "You've been awake for most of the night. It's not much of a day with you if I'm asleep." Weiss breathed despite her eyes already starting to close again. "I'm not exactly much fun at the minute," Jan hummed, the thumb of their joined hands softly stroking her palm. "I can clear my head while you get some rest." "Are you sure?" Jan gave a small nod. "Holding my gorgeous, sleeping girlfriend while I look at my beautiful former home? Can't think of a better way to clear my head." "Okay," Weiss whispered, too tired to argue. "Wake me up in an hour." As Yang's head gave a small nod of understanding, Weiss lifted her head for a second to place a kiss on her girlfriend's cheek. She never thought she would feel comfortable enough to fall asleep on someone, but it was easy with her. So easy, in fact, that once her head was back on the blonde shoulder and nestled into the crook of her neck, Weiss felt herself instantly fade into unconsciousness. Though not before she whispered a quiet, "I love you" to the woman whose arms she was cradled in.
And that's all for today. Thanks for coming by and hanging out. I hope to see you next time.